Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am Melanie White, President of the Women's Club. Thank you. I am just thrilled to welcome you to our first Monday program at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. We all miss our home, the Bowling Haxel House, but we are so fortunate to be here today. Thank you, Jamie Bosket. Thank you for hosting us. Jamie's going to talk to us, and then Robin Hurst, Chair of the Day, will introduce today's speaker, Louis Masur. Following today's program, please join us in the Halsey Hall, just right over this way, to meet our speaker, enjoy homemade refreshments prepared by the Finance Committee, and hear more announcements about all the great things the Women's Club is up to. Please silence your cell phone. This is the first speaker in this room. Let's honor it by not having our cell phones go off.
Good afternoon, everyone. As noted, my name is Jamie Bosket. I have the distinct honor of serving as the president and CEO of your State History Museum, and we have been looking forward to the beginning of this wonderful year of partnership for some time. We're deeply honored, and when I think of the Women's Club and I think of the VMHC, I think of a lot of shared values, and I think a lot of shared faces. So we thank our members as well and the coming together of these two fantastic organizations. The VMHC is the oldest museum in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We were founded, that's right. We were founded in 1831 with our first president as Chief Justice John Marshall. Our very first member was President James Madison. So since that moment nearly 2 centuries ago, we have amassed one of America's great history collections here in this institution. More than 9 million historical artifacts are stewarded by this place for the benefit of Virginians and Americans everywhere. And we're proud to do it. So we've grown a lot over 2 centuries, but I'm also proud to say that I think some of the best work we've ever done is the work we're doing right now. This institution is thriving in ways that others just are not, and it is through great hard work. It is through the collaborative effort and investment of our community. It is because we are focused on meeting important moments like America's 250th anniversary, which is now just a few months away. If you haven't started to think about it, now's the time. And be proud to know that your State History Museum is leading the way, offering one of the most robust commemorative programs of any history museum in the United States. So we will be ready for July 4th, 2026, and there'll be many opportunities for you all to come back and join us, in addition to your wonderful gatherings on Mondays to experience everything that this fine institution does for the Commonwealth. So thank you. I hope you have a wonderful presentation today, and we'll see you often throughout the year. Thank you.
I hope I'm not too close to the microphone, but I just want to say, hey, everybody. And from the enthusiasm that you gave to Melanie and Jamie, I know that you are as excited as I am to be here today for our very first program. And are you in for a treat? We have Dr. Louis Masur, who is with us from Rutgers University. And yeah, yay. He is a distinguished professor of American Studies and History. He's got a joint appointment with both of those departments at Rutgers. He's also the author of several books focusing on Lincoln and Lincoln's first speech, Lincoln's 100 Days, the Emancipation Proclamation and the War for the Union, and the Civil War, A Concise History. And these are just a few of the topics that he speaks on. Also, he's had essays and reviews that have appeared in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, and the LA Times. He's also written for the American Scholar, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, Salon, and Slate. Dr. Masur also has been elected to membership of the American Antiquities Society, the Massachusetts Historical Society, and the Society of American Historians. He's received teaching prizes for his work at Harvard, City College of New York, as well as Trinity College in Connecticut. And he lectures frequently throughout the country, as seen here today. So one interesting fact that we learned at lunch today is that Dr. Masur is a rock and roll fanatic. He teaches a class on rock and roll and history and culture at Rutgers, and he's also writing a book, but that's kind of a secret right now, so it hasn't been published. But anyway, I'd like to have you welcome Dr. Louis Masur.
Thank you so much. Get the sound level set. Are you good in the back? No, turn it up. This is a rowdy crowd already. They're yelling. Okay, now can everyone hear? Talk about rock and roll. So here's my thing. Jefferson and Madison are the Lennon and McCartney of the 18th century founding fathers. All right, we can talk more about that later. I just want to tell you how honored I am to be here, how much I want to thank the Women's Club of Richmond for what has been just an incredible morning. I got a tour of the museum. If you get a chance, you must go through and see these exhibits. They are just absolutely remarkable. And I think I'll have occasion later to talk about how moving it is to actually see and sometimes, if possible, even touch historical documents in their prime. I want to talk today about friendship. We think of these two men, as we should, as incredible politicians and political thinkers and political leaders and founding fathers, but we don't often think about their friendship. They were friends for 50 years, and theirs is the most important political friendship in American history. This trip that they took between May 21st and June 16th, 1791, they traveled over 900 miles together. And I like to think about it as a founding fathers road trip. As we'll see in a few minutes, for a variety of reasons, they wanted to get away. They wanted to take a trip. Here's the sort of journey. I don't have a laser pointer with me, but I think you guys could see they left from New York. They went up the Hudson River. They made it up to Poughkeepsie and Albany, where they dined with Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law. Haha, the intrigue grows. We'll get back to that. They cut across through Lake George and Lake Champlain. They went to Vermont, the new state of Vermont. They wanted to see it, and they had experiences there. They came back down through the Berkshires, and then through Connecticut. They crossed Long Island Sound into Long Island, and they came home and back to New York. They traveled by horseback and by coach. Jefferson loved to travel. Madison, not so much. He wasn't the most well-traveled of the founding fathers. That distinction goes to Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin crossed the Atlantic something like 8 times. John Adams, I think, crossed it 4 or 5 times. On one of them, his ship sprung a leak. He nearly drowned. Jefferson crossed it twice. Washington, his only trip was the trip that he visited the Barbados, but what he didn't do overseas, he did in the United States. As president, he famously took a tour of the entire United States because he thought it was important that the people see who this new president was. Who have I left out? Well, Madison. Nah. He had a lot of anxiety about traveling, and pretty much his travels were limited to this journey and trips between New York, Philadelphia, and of course, Virginia. Jefferson idealized travel, romanticized travel. He loved travel. When he went through a journey through France, when he was living there. He went alone. He insisted on going alone. He said, I will hire valets and as I need to. And one night he stayed at an inn. And from Marseille, he wrote this: a traveler retired at night to his chamber in an inn, all his effects contained in a single trunk, all his cares circumscribed by the walls of his apartment. Unknown to all, unheeded, undisturbed, he writes, reads, thinks, sleeps just in the moment when nature and the movements of the body of the mind require. Charmed with the tranquility of his little cell, he finds how few are our real wants, how cheap a thing is happiness. It really makes you want to travel. I felt that way last night at the Jefferson Hotel, but it wasn't that cheap. He so loved to travel that when he returned from his trip to France, he wrote something called Hints for Americans Traveling in Europe. This was considered part of the grand tour, right? If you were of an educated class, one of the things you did after you graduated was you went on a tour of Europe. And on this hint to travelers, one of the things he says is something to the effect, I can't find the exact quote right now, it doesn't matter, I can paraphrase it, is if you're speculating as to whether or not you should go to see something, go see it, because you never know when you'll have a chance to do so again. It's pretty good advice, right? I don't know how many of us have done that before. So we know that he loved to travel, but this journey was actually Madison's idea. Now, there's controversy, as Mike and I spoke about before the talk, about why did they take this trip? What's up? What's going on here? And forever, what has happened is their political opponents smelled a rat, as Patrick Henry once said, and thought that their trip was up to no good, that it was part of a campaign to try and enlist support for Jefferson and Madison's political party. But that's not why they took the trip. It may have been one of the effects of the trip, but there's a difference between causation and the result. Why did they take the trip? Well, they did so for a few reasons. One of them was for their health. Both of them suffered terribly. Jefferson famously throughout his life had migraines, terrible migraines. They would often shut him up for hours or days at a time in the dark, and he was particularly suffering in the spring of 1790 because a guy named Alexander Hamilton was causing him a lot of headaches. And Madison was always kind of sickly. We don't really know, what it was. Some historians have speculated maybe he had epilepsy. He would have seizures. He would have attacks. He would take ill. He said in a letter when he was very, very young that I must make the most out of my life because I shall not be very long-lived. Well, turns out, as you know, he was incredibly long-lived. So what does Madison say in a letter to Jefferson? He says, hey, let's take this trip for health, this is a quote, recreation, and curiosity. Yeah, I love that. Health, recreation, and curiosity. They thought that maybe they just needed to get away. They needed to get out of New York, get out of Philadelphia, get out of the cauldron of politics, which we'll talk more about in a second, and sort of escape. Now, I call the book The Forging of a Friendship. Let's be clear. They are already friends in 1791. Please don't make the mistake that I'm saying, this is when they became friends. When did they become friends? They became friends in 1776 is when they became friends. They became friends working together in the General Assembly, and Madison clearly looked up to Jefferson, both in stature and literally in height. Jefferson was 6'2", 6'3". How tall was Madison? 5'2", 5'3", something like that. And Jefferson was older, and Jefferson had written, of course, the Declaration of Independence, but they worked together. This is where their friendship first formed in 1776, but it really deepened a few years later when they were together in Philadelphia in 1783. And what did they bond over? You're looking at this, you're saying, what the heck is that? You know what that is? That's a list of books. I love lists of books. We saw some lists of books this morning, right? They bonded over books. Of course they did. Reading, thinking, the life of the mind, these consummate Enlightenment figures went back and forth. When Jefferson went to Europe, he sent books back, not by the basket, by the crateful, right? Literally hundreds of books. So here's kind of a list of books that he sent back. And as they walked around Philadelphia, their friendship grew. Jefferson, as many of you may know, was obsessed with temperature. He thought you should take a thermometer and record the weather every single day. He has these famous weather books that we can now know what the weather was, should we want to know, on May 5th, 1801, for example. And he says to Madison, you know what, Jimmy, you should really, he didn't say that, but you should really buy a thermometer. And so together, they are working together, bonding, traveling sometimes between Philadelphia and Virginia. In fact, Jefferson implores Madison to buy property near Monticello. You have to read this correspondence. It's hysterical. He becomes his real estate agent, in effect. He's sending him listings, right? Him, his secretary. He says, oh man, wouldn't that be great? Because that was his ideal of civilized society. Much like what this incredible women's club does, right? Get people together to talk, to have conversation, to take meals. This is what life was about. Madison, he kept his distance. What's hysterical is when you read Madison's letters, he always has a million reasons why he can't do something. I call it the omnibus excuse. So when Jefferson is in France, he says to Madison, come now. This is a great time for you to come and tour Europe. And Madison says, well, I can't. I don't really have the money. I'm very busy here with papers. I'm not feeling that well. If and when I do go to Europe, I want to stay for a longer period of time. You get the picture. Anyway, obviously Madison does not buy property near him, but this is the friendship that is starting to emerge through 1783 and in that period. As we know famously, Jefferson is in Paris from 1784 to 1789. Thank goodness we have their letters. Their correspondence is just remarkable. All the correspondence of the Founding Fathers is remarkable. And talk about great resources. There's a founders.org, is it? Gov, thank you. Founders.gov. All of the letters of the Founding Fathers online. This is my pandemic book. I mean, in 2020, 2021, I couldn't get to archives, but I could read all day long their letters. And so those letters, right? Those are the letters where Madison sends him a report on the Constitutional Convention. He sends him the first report of the Constitution. That's when Jefferson famously writes back, you know, I fear the omission of a Bill of Rights, and this conversation that goes back and forth between them. So their intellectual curiosity sort of continues to percolate. Well, Jefferson gets back, of course, in 1789, and he's appointed to George Washington's cabinet, Secretary of State. He's there with Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury. There are two other members. They sort of get out of the way. And the other important context for understanding this desire to take a trip was the political upheavals that began in many ways a year earlier. This is the moment of the birth of partisan politics in America. This is the moment of the birth of the first party system, of which Hamilton and Adams are going to be Federalists, of which Jefferson and Madison will be leading Democratic Republicans. It was only a year earlier where Madison, Jefferson, and Hamilton, June 20th, 1790, had the famous meeting memorialized in the play Hamilton, where they made the decision, the bargain, the agreement to pass funding and assumption in return for moving the seat of government to the banks of the Potomac. So the political headaches of 1790-91 are profound, and they're deep, and they're cantankerous. This is not an exaggeration. Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting, going the wrong way with this remote. There it is. There you go. This is an actual battle that took place on the floor of Congress. I mean, you think things are bad today? Look at that. And this is a famous moment. All right, this is Matt Lyons of Vermont representative. This is Roger Griswold of Kentucky. Anyway, they went back and forth. Matt Lyons ended up spitting tobacco juice in Griswold's face, hence earning the sobriquet Spitting Matt Lyons for the rest of his life. Griswold decides to go at him with a club. He takes the tongs out of the fireplace. Everybody else is kind of laughing hysterically. But partisan politics are amped up. And it's the first time. And here's the other thing. The founding fathers despaired the emergence of political parties. Jefferson famously said, if I cannot go to heaven but with party, I shall not go there at all. And then ironically, of course, he's at the head of what is a competing political party. When he gets elected president in 1800, he tries to reduce that anxiety, right? He famously says, we are all Federalists, we are all Republicans, but he didn't govern that way. And so those political battles are also affecting them in the spring of 1791. One last thing before we get to the trip, because I have to set the context for you. Jefferson is in a world of trouble because somebody sent him Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. Now, what was Thomas Paine's Rights of Man? It was a response to reflections on the French Revolution that denounced the French Revolution. Paine had defended it in Rights of Man. And there's a lot of this debate going on in America, right? Opponents and proponents of the French Revolution. Jefferson's on the side of yes, Adams is on the side of no. And so he gets this copy of the Rights of Man, and he's asked to forward it to the publisher. And he does, and he forwards it with a note, harmless enough. The note says something like, this book should go a long way to offsetting the heresies of the day. Not so veiled reference to John Adams, who's been writing these essays condemning the French Revolution. Okay, the note's okay. Guess what? It gets published in the book with the signature Secretary of State. So it looks as if it's an official endorsement by the Secretary of State of a rebuttal of Edmund Burke's book that denounces John Adams. Oh my goodness. The gossip is unbelievable, right? I've read diaries, you read letters. Poor George Washington has to deal with this stuff. I love that guy, and I really feel for him. People are coming to him. Your Secretary of State has said this, he said that. Okay, they want to get away. Time to go. And this trip up through New York and New England and down through Long Island seems appealing. Both of them want to see this territory, which indeed is Federalist territory, but I'm not sure they want to see it in order to proselytize. But they want to go on this trip. Now, one of the things that they do want, on the trip, this is so Jefferson, it's fantastic. I just love this. Jefferson keeps a list of all the inns that he stayed in, and he rates them good, middling, bad. Yeah, he's doing Google reviews in 1791, right? And it's classic Jefferson. So, we're in Poughkeepsie, we traveled 16 miles, we stayed at Lasher's. Oh, Lasher's was good, right? He's got these little symbols. Oh my God, it's just fantastic. This is one of the other reasons for the trip. Prior to leaving on the trip, Jefferson attended a meeting of the American Philosophical Society, one of the great scientific literary organizations ever created, right? Created in part by Ben Franklin. And they had a meeting to discuss the problems of something called the Hessian fly. What's the Hessian fly? Well, it was literally a fly, an insect, that infected and destroyed wheat crops. Whatever else we think we know about the founding fathers, particularly the Virginians, it's important to remember this. They were farmers. And as farmers, something like the Hessian fly should it arrive in Virginia, would be absolutely devastating. Right now, it's in Long Island, and it's up in New York. And so the American philosopher says to Jefferson, while you're on the road, can you make inquiries about the progress of the Hessian fly? And so he does. These are his notes on the Hessian fly, right? They didn't keep a lot of records on the trip, but one of the records that Jefferson kept was notes on the Hessian fly. And everywhere he went, he became a sort of, a field anthropologist, an entomologist, right? That's what these guys are. They're everything. Entomology, botany, anthropology. There's nothing that didn't interest them. We can't just think of them as politicians. And so he keeps notes on the Hessian fly and on its progress across the land. So that's one of the reasons for the trip. When he gets back to Philadelphia, he reports to the American Philosophical Society about it. Classic Jefferson mode. What does he do? He has somebody send him larvae of the Hessian fly that he examines under a microscope, and he starts literally dissecting its parts. And Madison is in on this too. Back and forth, they're writing about this. In one of the letters discussing the Constitutional Convention, the last paragraph is about the Hessian fly and its effect on the wheat crops. Now, we tend to focus just on the stuff about the Constitution. What I'm suggesting is we need to focus as well on the stuff about the Hessian fly. And the wheat crop is significant. This is the major export crop. Virginians have moved from tobacco to wheat. And so in order to produce wheat, both for domestic consumption and for export, it's absolutely, absolutely critical that they figure this out. So they're on the trip for health, recreation, and curiosity. They're on the trip, or while they're on the trip, they want to find out about the Hessian fly. The trip continues. They're writing in their diary about the flowers and about the landscape and about the trees and about the animals. They go hunting. They hunt rattlesnakes. They do all sorts of things that you might expect them to do. And then there's a really incredible moment. There's a moment when they encounter a free black farmer. A free black farmer they encounter at Fort George. And it's so striking that Madison writes one of the longest entries in his journal about meeting this free black farmer. So Jefferson kept a journal, Madison kept a journal. There's the rating of inns, there's the Hessian notes, there's a couple of letters. These are the sources I have for trying to tell this story. Let me read to you, and this is it in manuscript. See at the very heart. At Fort George are a few families concerned in the litter trade. On the east side, not a house is seen except one at the north, owned and inhabited by a free Negro. He possesses a good farm, about 250 acres, which he cultivates with 6 white hirelings, for which he is said to have paid about $2.50 per acre. Wait, I read that too fast. He cultivates it with 6 white hirelings. This free black man has 6 white guys working for him, who he's paying $2.50 per acre, and by his industry and good management turns to good account. He is intelligent, reads, writes, understands accounts. He's dexterous in his affairs. During the late war, he was employed in the commissary department. He has no wife and is said to be disinclined to marriage, nor any woman on his farm. This free black farmer who caught Madison's attention has a name. His name was Prince Taylor. Now, why Madison doesn't use his name, I don't know. We can speculate about that. And Prince Taylor was an enslaved person in Massachusetts who won his freedom by serving in the Continental Army during the Revolution. In the aftermath, he got land in Western New York, and he made something incredible of himself. I want to tell you something else that I intentionally didn't begin with. They're the third person on this trip, along with Jefferson and Madison. James Hemings, Jefferson's enslaved chef and valet. The only reason I know this is because there's an entry in his account book where Jefferson says he sent Hemings up the river, the Hudson, with his horses. And that's it. And sadly, it's so often the case. Right? These people who were so essential to the lives of these individuals seem to get lost to us. And we have to do lots and lots of work to try and recover, to the extent that we can, their lives. Very briefly, Madison and Jefferson both had complicated relationships to slavery. We know this. They never could quite figure out what to do about the institution, even though they were both anti-slavery. Particularly Jefferson, who famously said, "I cannot sleep when I think that God is just and his justice cannot sleep forever." Madison becomes president of the American Colonization Society. There's some of this on the exhibit upstairs, where they thought that the solution to the problem of race in America was to have free blacks voluntarily migrate elsewhere. Liberia becomes a colony for free blacks leaving. But they can never really wrap their heads around what to do. And of course, neither emancipated their slaves except for Jefferson, who emancipated the children he had with Sally Hemings, one of whom was named James Madison Hemings, after his good friend. As for Hemings ultimately got his freedom. Jefferson said he needed time to train a replacement. He does so. Hemings gets his freedom, but sadly, his end is tragic, and he ends up committing suicide. But these lives, these crucial lives that all too often remain invisible, are worthy of our attention and our thought. And I can't help but think, if James Hemings was there seeing this free black farmer, what was he thinking? And what did both of them think as they moved on? He thought enough of it to write that long, long entry in his journal. They move on to Vermont. What is Vermont known for? Yeah, the sugar maple tree. And this is another, not as important as the Hessian fly, but another reason for their trip. Americans at this very moment, 1791, are trying to find a domestic alternative for sugar to imported sugar, cane sugar, which was coming from the Caribbean. There's a vast transatlantic movement to do this. There are tens of thousands of people in England who take a vow of abstinence. They will not use cane sugar. And in the United States, there's also a movement to sort of move away from cane sugar. So can the sugar maple tree produce enough sugar domestically to satisfy our needs and then also become part of an export? I mean, this all may sound kind of crazy, but it's huge. A guy named Benjamin Rush, I love him, gadfly, signer of the Declaration of Independence. He's the leading physician in America. He's got a hand in everything. He writes one of the longest tracts about the use of domestic sugar production and argues that you could do it. You could tap these sugar maple trees and then therefore not have to be reliant on imports, not have to be reliant on sugar for those who had an anti-slavery bent that was being produced by enslaved labor in the Caribbean, and that, in fact, families could get wealthy doing this. So he would hold these little tea parties, and he would invite famous people to come and take tea, and he would serve them tea, and in some he would put domestic sugar made from the sugar maple tree, and in some he would put cane sugar. It's a taste test. It's like one of the first taste tests. And he invites them to see if they can tell the difference. Alexander Hamilton is one of the guys who's invited. He says, "Oh, I can't tell the difference. Domestic sugar is great." So they're up in Vermont, and Vermont is indeed more to the Democratic Republican side. The other thing that they do is they tour battlefields. We think a lot about historical memory. And this is so soon after the revolution, but this is the Battle of Saratoga. These are the battles that took place in Vermont. And they want to see these battlefields. Neither one of them had, of course. George Washington earlier had toured them as well. And so this becomes one of the first moments in which we have the sort of memorialization of American revolutionary sites. And they write about what it is to have seen the places where the Battle of Bennington, famous battle in Vermont, or Saratoga took place. They ended up staying with the governor of Vermont, and they're stuck there on a Sunday, and there are rules against travel on Sunday in Vermont. And so Governor Robinson takes them to church. There were jokes from the political opponents that this is probably the first time Jefferson was in a church in 30 years, right? And Jefferson sits there and he hears a sermon from Job Swift, and he doesn't write about it, but it's a chance to think about, what were his thoughts about hearing this sermon, and of course the ways in which Federalist preachers would come to oppose him in his later administration. They finally get out of Vermont, they head back down, and they end up in Connecticut. Now, Connecticut is strong Federalist territory, right? Connecticut. And at this point, the Federalists are writing vociferously, gossiping about the trip that the two of them are on, speculating that they're out there to do no good. They must be meeting to foment some political upheaval. I just thought about his meeting with Philip Schuyler in Albany. I mean, think about that. Schuyler is Hamilton's father-in-law. And also Jefferson had a thing for Angelica, Eliza's sister, but Jefferson had a thing for a lot of different women. He actually writes a letter in which he says, I hope to see you, to Angelica. I hope to see you at your father's estate, blah, blah, blah. So there's reason to be thinking about some of this stuff. So they're in Hartford, Connecticut, the center of New England federalism. And a guy named Nathaniel Hazard, who's a merchant, writes a letter to Alexander Hamilton of what he heard at a dinner party held in Hartford. And at that dinner party, he says that all of these prominent politicians and lawyers ridiculed Jefferson and Madison's tour, in which they scoured silently through the country, shunning the gentry, of course, because these guys got nothing for the gentry, communing with and pitying the Shays'ites. Quick history lesson, 1787, Daniel Shays' rebellion in Western Massachusetts. It's one of the precipitating causes of the desire to create the Constitution. So they're pitying the Shays'ites, quarreling with the eatables. Nothing's good enough for them to eat, right? Nothing's good enough to eat. And then he says nothing is good enough for them. Anyhow, they get out of Hartford and they take the boat across Long Island Sound. It's the longest journey by sea that Madison ever had. The guy must have been purple. I mean, but he did it. It's an overnight trip across, and they end up on Long Island. And they end up going to visit a plantation, an estate. And it must have been a very uncomfortable moment. They were at Colonel Floyd's estate. And there was a moment in 1783 where Madison thought he was engaged to Kitty Floyd, and Kitty broke off the engagement. And now here he is at Floyd's plantation in Long Island. Kitty's not there. She ran off with somebody else. She dumped Madison. And Madison's not yet with Dolly. Hence, it's really interesting that he said about the black farmer, he has no wife. And so it turns out that Floyd lives very close to an Indian reservation. The Indian reservation and a nursery are nearby. Jefferson goes to this nursery, Prince's Nursery, and he orders stuff to be sent to Monticello. Of course he does. This is why he was in debt forever and ever and ever. You know what he orders? He orders all kinds of things. He has Prince send him every single sugar maple tree he has. And I write about this in the book. I don't want to take too much time on it. It's almost comedic. Jefferson keeps trying to get sugar maples to grow in Virginia soil in Monticello, and it keeps failing. And you can almost see him in his letters. He's like knocking his head against the wall. Why can't this happen? Why can't this happen? He keeps writing his foreman. He goes back and forth on this. He says at one point, I propose to make me a large orchard of pecan and roanoke and Missouri scaly barks, which I possess, and of Gloucester and common scaly barks, of which I shall plant the nuts. Of these I shall add the sugar maple tree, if I can procure it. I do not see why we may not have our sugar orchards. That's 1808. He doesn't give up on it. The Indian reservation is fascinating. He meets members of the Unkachag tribe. And Jefferson is fascinated by and obsessed with Native American languages and vocabulary. Sure, he's interested in everything. He was curious about the origins of Native Americans. Did they start in Asia and come over the Bering Straits into North America? Or did they start here and progress outward in a different direction? And he had been thinking about Indian vocabulary and collecting Indian vocabularies for a project, this lifetime sort of project. And so we have this moment where he gets to meet several Native Americans, members of the Unkachag tribe. This amazes me. And this is why history is so alive when you go upstairs and you see these documents. He pulls out of his pocket a piece of paper. It's actually a letter he had received. This is the letter. You can see the stamp there. Here upside down, it says Honorable Thomas Jefferson. And someone handed him a quill. And on the back of this piece of paper, he stood there and he dictated words and had them read back to him the equivalent in Unkachag. Snow, ice, hail, sun, morn, star. 200 and something words. That document exists. It's in the collections of the American Philosophical Society. And I have a lot of bone-chilling moments. Joni saw me this morning jump up and down, seeing a document behind glass. Well, listen to this. I go to the American Philosophical Society and I said, I'm writing a book about this. Is there any way I could see the document? And at first they bring me a photostatic copy. And I'm like, no. I want to hold this document in my hands. And I put on gloves and they retrieve it from the vault and I held it in my hands. And that makes history come alive. Well, he became absolutely obsessed with Indian languages. He continues to collect vocabularies. He creates a list that gets printed. He sends it along with Lewis and Clark on their journey out west. Lewis and Clark send back dozens of vocabularies. His lifetime project is this. He's creating a book called The Comparative Vocabularies of the Various Indian Tribes. And he thinks this is the key, right? This is the linguistic key to the universe. And look at this. So, you have the different tribes, Chippewa, Algonquin, Shawnee, Mohican, Oneida, Cayuga. Here's the word for white, the word for black, the word for green. He's doing this while he's president. Talk about multitasking. And sadly and tragically, when he packs up to leave office, the crate that contains all of the vocabularies is stolen, cracked open, and the only thing left was floating in the mud. If you look at this document, look at the stains on this document, this was recovered from the mud of the river. And after this, he essentially gave up on the project. Basically, his life's work had been destroyed. But it was not for naught. It was not for naught. If Jefferson's study of Indian vocabularies failed to produce the results he expected, it provided unexpected benefit. Never would he have imagined that the vocabularies he collected in the 18th century might allow native tribes in the 21st century to reclaim their lost languages. In 2010, Chief Harry Wallace of the Uncochaug Nation announced an effort to revive the language. To do so, Uncochaug scholars would examine land deeds, legal documents, religious records, and word lists. Paramount to their efforts were the 201 words Jefferson recorded in June of 1791, listing them on the back of a piece of paper that he pulled from his pocket. After they both complete their presidencies and they return to civilian life at Monticello, Montpelier, Jefferson's great project, of course, as you know, is the University of Virginia. He enlists Madison as well in that project. He puts him on the board of overseers. Education, the academical village. As you all know, we were talking earlier on our tour about tombstones. Jefferson composed what should be written on his own tombstone. Of course he did. He left nothing to chance, right? And you know what he said, right? You know what he said. You've seen it. It's amazing. Nothing about Secretary of State, nothing about Vice President, nothing about President. Here lies the author of the Declaration of Independence, the author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and the founder of the University of Virginia. Their time is getting short. And the reason why I know beyond any doubt that this trip was a seminal trip that deepened their friendship. Jefferson said on that trip they became immediate companions. The reason why I know, they never, ever forgot it. And they each had occasion in the 1820s to remember it. Margaret Bayard Smith came to visit Madison, and Madison told her a story. I love this story. Because we would never know otherwise. Now think about this. He's remembering this story 33 years later. He says, while we're on the trip, the new Constitution of the United States, having just been put into operation, forms of government were the uppermost topic in everyone's mind. The question was started as, what's the best mode of providing the executive chief? And it was among the opinion boldly advanced that a hereditary designation was preferable to any elective process that could be devised. They wanted hereditary presidency. At the close of an eloquent diffusion against the agitation and animosities of popular choice, and in behalf of birth, on the whole, affording a better chance of a suitable head of government, Mr. Jefferson, with a smile, remarked he had heard of a university somewhere in which the professor of mathematics was hereditary. The reply received with acclamation was the coup de grace to the anti-Republican hero. These are some of the conversations maybe that they were having. What kind of form of government should there be? They work together on the University of Virginia. Jefferson, too, has occasion to recall the trip. His granddaughter got married at Monticello, and she went on a journey with her husband that absolutely copied the journey that Jefferson and Madison had gone on. Jefferson writes her a long letter saying, yes, this is the trip that we took. And he talks about the differences between New England and Virginia in that letter. And then it becomes time to sort of say goodbye. Jefferson knows his time is short, and they exchange valedictory letters. Jefferson writes, the friendship which has subsisted between us now half a century, the harmony of our political principles has been a source of constant happiness. It gave him great solace. And he says in closing, take care of me when dead, and I shall leave you with my last affections. Well, boy, did Madison take care of him when dead. No one dare say anything about Mr. Jefferson that was wrong, that Mr. Madison didn't correct. In 1831-32, when the debate over tariffs erupted, and someone said Jefferson would have been opposed to protective tariffs, Madison, no, you've got that wrong. But it went to the nearest detail. Somebody gave him a copy of a biography, and Madison offered this correction. Jefferson's hair was not red, but between yellow and red. Madison replied a week later, you cannot look back on this long period of our friendship and political harmony with more affecting recollections than I do. If they are a source of constant pleasure to you, what ought they not be to me? Wishing and hoping you may yet live to increase the debt which our country owes you, to witness the increasing gratitude which alone can pay it, I offer you the fullest return of affectionate assurances. In his will, Jefferson left Madison his walking stick. How perfect is that? I give to my friend James Madison of Montpelier my gold-mounted walking staff with animal horn as a token of the cordial and affectionate friendship which for nearly now half a century has united us in the same principles and pursuits of which we have deemed the greatest good of our country. And on receiving it, Madison wrote to Thomas Jefferson Randolph, Jefferson's grandson, that he accepted it with all the feelings due to such a token of the place I had in the friendship of one whom I so much revered and loved when living, and whose memory can never cease to be dear to me. On his death, Madison bequeathed it back to Randolph, and the Thomas Jefferson Foundation now has it. That walking stick, gold-mounted and made of bone, it paid tribute to the many miles they had traveled together in one another's company. As long as they were together, they were never out of their way. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. We have time. Thank you. Hey, that's really, thank you so much. I know some people have to leave. Some still want to stay. We have questions and answers. We have 10 minutes or so. Is that correct for questions and answers? 5 minutes. If you don't get a chance to ask me a question, please feel free to email me. There's my email address. You'll discover that I will respond very quickly because I have no life. So all I do is check emails and respond back to you. And as you were kind enough to say in your introduction, Robin, that I have a wide range of interests. And if you go on my website, you can see what some of my other sort of writings and works are, if that interests you. If you do decide to buy a book and you'd like a signed book plate, if I don't get to sign a book today or one of my other books, I'd be happy to do that. So with that, there's a lady back there with her hand up first. And I think there's a microphone going around. If you can wait for the mic, that's great. If not, let's just do it.
Thanks very much for a fascinating talk. I was struck in reading the book with Jefferson's French chef, James Hemings, and was so sad to hear about his suicide. Were you able to find any much information about his life, particularly from his freedom unto his death?
Yeah, the place to go is there's a great book called The Hemmings of Monticello by Annette Gordon Reed. That's the place to go if you really want to know the details of the Hemmings family. What we know about James is when Jefferson, we know a lot about James, but when Jefferson became president, he wanted to hire James back, pay him a salary to be his chef in the president's house. And he didn't write to James directly. He did it through a third party, and James turned him down. But you can learn a lot more about James and his relationship, of course, with his siblings, of whom Sally Hemings is, of course, his younger sister. Yes.
You mentioned that. Can you hear me?
That's all right. Just yell.
Okay. You said earlier that Jefferson was indeed the father of Sally Hemings' children.
Yes.
Is that dispute been settled?
It has been. I mean, I could go more into that if you like, but I mean, so the question is, has it really been settled that Thomas Jefferson fathered children with Sally Hemings? And of course, for a very long time, it was discussed, debated, refuted. People didn't want to think about it. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation and all Jefferson scholars now accept the DNA evidence as incontrovertible, that indeed he was the father of those children. And those are the only enslaved persons who he emancipates, by the way, in his will. But if you want more information about it, you should see the considerable statement on the Monticello website that discusses the evidence, the history of the evidence for and against, and how ultimately they reached the conclusion to, with some certainty, to state that now as historical fact. Yes, over here.
I just came back from the tour of Poplar Forest.
Okay.
And I found that fascinating. Have you been to Poplar?
I have not. The question is about Poplar Forest, and the tour, we understand, is fascinating. I have a lot of places to go to, and my hope is to do a sort of a historical sites golf tour through Virginia. That's my plan. My plan for the future. Yes, ma'am. Yes, right here. Go ahead. I'll translate the question. Go ahead.
So I'm trying to clarify a quote.
Yeah.
The thought was attributed to Jefferson that he went to Europe and said when he was there he realized how great or how wonderful America was as he had left it and saw something else. Is that?
So the question is Jefferson's comments in Europe about what we would call democracy or government. And it's not so much that parts of Europe by comparison. What's really interesting is he had a lot of comments about soil, right? And he's a farmer and he understood the ways in which soil could dictate, right? For him, he believed soil was the foundation of liberty. Look, this is the great divide between him and Hamilton. And we don't have time for a Hamilton-Jefferson lecture, although that would be interesting too. But Jefferson believed in growth across space. And so those places in Europe where he saw the ideal of the independent farmer, yes, that, but in the congested cities, right? The sores, he called them, on the body politic, that he saw as the antithesis of the sort of Arcadian beauty, and he was right, of the United States. So there's a lot of sort of contemplations and meditations, but primarily on how soil connects to forms of government. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Yeah, I'll give you a great takeaway in case you're ever sitting around. Jefferson believed in growth across space. Hamilton believed in development through time. That'll be on your final exam. To discuss that, to tease that out. Maybe we have time for one more question. I think this gentleman here is trying to get in a question.
Yes,
Last question.
Some of us recently have celebrated the 200th anniversary of the coming to America of the Marquis de Lafayette.
Yes.
And his visit here.
Yes.
And with Jefferson and with Madison. and I believe it at Montpelier.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, I got a great comment on it. Oh, you got it. So I couldn't tell you everything that's in the book. I got to make you buy it and read it. But so guess what? One of the trips that Madison does take is with Lafayette, not when Lafayette returns the conquering hero, but after the American Revolution. He goes with Lafayette out west to see the signing of a treaty. The treaty doesn't come about, so he comes back on his own. And here's classic Madison. He didn't like Lafayette. He had some nasty things to say about him. At the time of his return triumphal visit, he edits his letters and revises them to take out his negative comments from back then. Is that awesome? Which is all about why it's just so great to be a historian. Let me just finish by telling you how amazing this visit has been for me and how amazing an audience you guys have been.